from my key. I think to keep the discussion going, got it? Is the same presentation that I was? Yeah, click that.
This one?
Yeah. And click on the one on the top. Thank you. Thank you so much.
So it's very difficult to find a yes.
I'll show you my slides. Okay, so yeah, I, as I said, there's not enough data at this time to show that, but there is, I think, a role, a place that micro-ultrasound will have. We talk about MR, the advantages of MR, and I think there are certain advantages to MR. But the questions that come into play are, is it access to MR? I think coming from Canada, where we have a public healthcare system, if we were to try to scan every patient first on an MR, so we do about 100,000 prostate biopsies a year in Canada, approximately. To scan an extra 100,000 patients on the magnet before the first biopsy, if you look at the number of hours that I need, say 40 minutes, 35 to 40 minutes per scan at this stage, I will need about 18 to 20 extra magnets dedicated only to prostate MR, scanning just prostate MR across the country. So access to MR can and will remain an issue. If in the future we have some data on MR stating that screening 2-sequence 20-minute scans is good enough, maybe access doesn't remain as much of an issue. But as of today, I think access is one of the biggest issues. I'm sorry, I think that was on the other which did not load up. The other issues that I would bring up is inter-observer read variabilities. And I think if you go back, there's a publication last year in radiology from Andy Rosenkratz's group, 6 expert readers across 6 sites of excellence in the US, and the kappa score for lesions was about 0.5. So at best, a moderate reproducibility, and I think that remains a problem with MR. There's a learning curve of reading MRs. And I think, and if you also look at the data that is out there for positive predictive value of PARAT 4 and PARAT 5 lesions on an MR, and this is coding papers from NIH and other sites. The positive predictive value of a PARAT 4 called prospectively was about 20% for Gleason 7, any volume Gleason 7. And a positive predictive value for a PARAT 5 was about 70%, 67 to 70%. So there are a lot of false positives on MR, and I think those are questions to be addressed as well. And the third point I would like to raise, well, before that, I would also say that MR, I think, is very good for larger lesions. Again, quoting a study from the Sloan Kettering group, the negative predictive value of MR for lesions which were larger than 0.5 cc's or 8 or 9, 10 millimeters was about 94, 95%. But for lesions which were less than 0.5 cc's, the negative predictive value of MR was about 25%. So we were missing a lot of lesions which were small on MR, even though they were Gleason 7. But I know there's data which has come out from HASH, and that will be published, which kind of contradicts what has been published in the past. But there are publications which state that MR has its drawbacks as well. And then the question of negative predictive value of MR, and I think we all agree for any volume Gleason 4, it's about 85 to 90%. We do miss about 10 to 15%, even in the best of hands. MR does not pick up about 10 to 15% of Gleason 4 component disease. But we don't know what should be the trigger for biopsy in these patients if we were to use MR as our primary kind of a screening tool in patients who have a clinical reason to have a biopsy. So I do strongly feel that this may have a place. All this time we've been comparing, we've been saying that MR is very good because we've been comparing it to conventional ultrasound. Perhaps MR, the benefit of MR to high resolution scanning may not be as much. And then again, the paradigm shifts. As Hash was saying, we have all this data on conventional ultrasound. Now we're going to start afresh from scratch. Once we have targeted biopsies, all the data is going to waste. And then you have a new device, and then you start comparing that to MR, and then you again maybe have to do some cost-effective analysis at that time. I mean, this is too early to state, but I think there needs to be some more data. There is hope, but till we have done more studies, there are more multi-center trials comparing MR to high-res. I think at this stage, MR remains the gold standard, but there is hope that it may have a role to play in the future. Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for questions, and it's my great privilege to give that opportunity to me first. So, we have a lot of believers here, and they always talk about their own gospel, and they all have to believe that. But you are the ones that to decide which one of these is going to make it. The question was asked before, do you believe in ultrasound, do you believe in MRI, or do you believe in both? Well, if you want to be safe, you believe in both, because there's always one in it. But now you have to think straight, deep in your heart. 5 years from now, comes my question, 5 years from now, who thinks that ultrasound will be as good as MRI in detecting prostate cancer? I don't say better, don't say worse. Who thinks that it will be as good in 5 years from now? Can you raise your hand? I'm biased, by the way. Good, it's half. That's interesting. Second thing is, I'm looking at the director of the biopsy center, which means, and I think that's the future, centralization of care. And I think the nice thing is Sangeet has access to and MRI and ultrasound. So he has to decide. Now, Sangeet, when I was looking at your images, and now it becomes a little bit difficult for you, because I looked at your images with MRI, which you didn't show, and MRI, I always like these transverse images. And why? Because you can mirror image the prostate. If you see a lesion on the left, you can compare to the normal right and vice versa. With ultrasound, it's difficult. You always showed me transverse, longitudinal images. And you convinced me you see lesion here, lesion there. I would feel more comfortable if you would show me all the transverse images. What do you think?
So there's a lot of work which was done to make sure that the lesions that we're questioning on the high-res is the same lesion on the MR or not. So when we obtain our MR, I mean, I must say that the MRs were not done at my site. MRs, I was one of the readers for the MRs, but the MRs were not done at my site, but I did read the MRs, blinded. We did look at the images, and we looked at the SAG images, so we would obtain the protocol needed the T2 images to be obtained in all the 3 planes. So you can easily correlate it back on the SAG plane or the para-SAG plane and look on the ultrasound to correlate if it's the same lesion or not. So that is how we kind of assessed if it was the same lesion.
So my question was different. Why don't we look at the transverse image in ultrasound, and why do we look at the transverse in MRI? Because I think MRI looks
sure.
easier. Why not an ultrasound?
Yeah, so I think this device, because it's not an end-fire, but it's a side-fire probe, it allows us, at this stage, only the SAG images. So, but the MR, yes, even on ultrasound, I've done a lot of biopsies using the standard platform, the IU-22 Philips, the 9 to 11 megahertz prostate biopsies. Yes, we do imaging in the axial plane, but the biopsies are almost always done in the SAG plane, the medial lateral biopsies. So the issue with high-res at this stage is that we don't have axial images, so we have to do with the SAG images. But it's not difficult to correlate the axial images seen on MR to the SAG images on MR.
Good. I have one more question to you, and again, maybe Harsh can join us in, because he's Mr. Imaging, Europe, global, whatever. So in 5 years from now again, and maybe Jochen joins in as well, in 5 years again, I see here, as I mentioned, Director of Biopsy Center. So I've seen this with renal ultrasound, abdominal ultrasound. I've got a room, 4 ultrasound machines, 4 technicians. They do all the work. Do we really need doctors to do all this? Having said this, is it not just that you need a technician who can do the job and you instruct the technician, and then suddenly if you talk about manpower and cost, it becomes very affordable if you use, for example, ultrasound?
So I think perhaps we could have used a technician with the conventional ultrasound in the past if we were not trying to assess what is being seen on the imaging. But here we're trying to identify the patterns. I think there's a learning curve. We are seeing new things. I'm sure we need to have an idea about how to interpret ultrasound images, and the biopsies come down to the same setting. So I do think that at this stage, this is more image-based kind of directed biopsies, and this should be a physician-directed procedure to be done.
Hashim, give us the European perspective, which of course is different, I presume.
I'm very enthusiastic about multiparametric ultrasound. Your centre's shown very good data. This looks... So, I'm very keen about multiparametric ultrasound. Amsterdam has shown very nice data. This looks promising. I was a little curious about your comment that the MRIs were not done at your center, and you might want to say whether you were happy about the quality of the MRIs.
Yes, that's...
Because they were those were odd results, but they're data, and we have to be data-driven. I think you've hit the nail on the head. This can be done by a technician to acquire the images in a high-quality manner using a robotic arm, perhaps, that will just sweep slowly through the prostate and acquire a video clip, cine clip, that then you, in your own time, will look at over half an hour and report it in the way you would normally report a multiparametric MRI. Why on earth are we using this fantastic image modality, which might be giving us lots of information, and trying to decipher it within 5 to 10 minutes with a squirming, wriggling patient at the other end? So I agree with you. I think you get the images, high quality, you lock them, and then you or me look at the images and issue a report on a different day. And then we do the biopsies. This idea of trying to get everything done in one go just doesn't work. We generally don't have that much patience, I think.
I would probably contradict that. I would say that one of the biggest advantages of doing this real time is you can actually biopsy at the same sitting. That's one big advantage to the patient. You would do the 12 cores. You can go back to the images to assess, you get more information as well, what is cancer and what was not cancer, rather than relying totally on a new device and trying to kind of decide just based on imaging, as of now, till we have more data at least, that this is cancer and this is not cancer and this needs to be targeted and this does not need to be targeted.
You can still do the systematic afterwards. I'm just saying that you're compromising your reading ability. So we're running a trial called Cadmus at the moment, and we have a junior fellow who acquires the images, and then we report them afterwards. And the report is locked. The MRI report is locked. Nobody looks at any of each other's findings, and then the biopsy is done on another day. To put the pressure of the biopsy on the day, I think compromises the diagnostic readability. The MRI radiologists don't do that.
I think a last comment, please.
I just wanted to give, so you are speaking in 5 years' time.
And I really am 100% sure that in 5 years' time, MRI will be so much advanced than it is now. Because we just speak about the advancement of ultrasound, but I mean with all the radiogenomics story that is coming out, I mean all this kurtosis, imaging skewness and so on, and this cut analysis and so on, I think MRI is really, in 5 years' time, it won't be where it is now.
I love true believers. Jochen?
I just have a short comment. I completely share the point of view of Hash. Multiparametric MRI is very promising for the future, but we would need indeed a possibility to have a look at it on a console, where we get 3D data sets of high resolution ultrasound, of elastography, of contrast enhancement, especially in 3D or 4D. And if we only have this, we can sit down and look at them, rule in and rule out different areas that might be suspicious or not. And I think only in this way, if this is available, ultrasound might become an alternative to MR. And actually, we're not that far away from that. Supersonic is very close to provide this technology, 3D imaging of the elastography sequences of, to my knowledge, reasonable quality of contrast-enhanced imaging of high resolution, good resolution, grayscale ultrasound. And if we can integrate the high resolution, high frequency ultrasound, I think we have an additional information coming there. And then we can add again the artificial neural network analysis to it in a form of radiomics. I think there's a lot of potential behind it, and this is why I voted for in 5 years ultrasound might be a true alternative to MR, especially in those places where MR is not available. But we still need some more infrastructure and some more technology in order to do that.
Bueno, vamos mal de tiempo. Yo que soy un entusiasta de la ecografía desde hace 30 años, pienso que es una exploración dinámica, que el que la hace es el que verdaderamente la interpreta y consigue un feedback continuo haciendo ecografía. Por lo poco que he visto de la micro ultrasound, estoy convencido de que el que la haga, tomándose las cosas en serio, haciéndola bien, va a conseguir poder conseguir explotar todo el potencial de esta tecnología. Y yo creo que nos esperan grandes sorpresas. Y conociendo a los urólogos, como los conozco desde hace 35 años, yo creo que somos gente muy atea, no somos creyentes, y sobre todo somos gente muy práctica, que en cuanto vemos un camino que nos parece razonable, nos tiramos a él. Tenemos que acabar esta charla. El doctor Algaba se tiene que marchar, entonces nos ha pedido que adelantemos su charla, doctor Algaba, y la moderadora, Carla, no sé si está por ahí.